Hi, everyone, and welcome to UBS Trending. I'm your host, Anthony Pastore. In a new CIO report entitled Our Favorite Longer-Term Themes, CIO takes a look at their major themes and combines these quantitative indicators with qualitative screening to determine those that offer particularly compelling entry points for theme-oriented investors. Someone like yourself, perhaps. So what made the list and why? We're going to discuss that right now with Michelle LaLiberty, thematic investing strategist with the Chief Investment Office. Michelle, good to have you back.
Thanks for having me.
Good to see you. So, okay, before we get into the report that I just highlighted in the intro, CIO recently released in November the Year Ahead 2023 report entitled The Year of Inflections. Maybe you can tell us a little bit more about CIO's general views going into next year.
Sure, I think that's a great place to start. And after a pretty challenging year for many investors, we do believe we're entering what we're calling a year of inflection. So going into the year, we have this backdrop of high inflation, higher interest rates, geopolitical tension that really has not dissipated yet. But as 2023 moves on, we do expect to see this inflection happen where we should have central banks move away from tightening. And this, of course, is barring any kind of black swan events or significant escalation of geopolitical tensions. But those aside, we should see, again, that inflection where the economies that are slowing now begin to trough. So that's kind of how we're thinking about it moving into next year.
Terrific. Yes, I know there's a lot on the table as far as what the uncertainties are surrounding the pace of inflation. But yeah, I know that the CIO expectations are that we have peaked and inflation should be trending lower, hopefully through the year. So let's get into the thematic report. Again, it's titled Our Favorite Longer-Term Themes. And I know that you and I have been here a few times over the last year talking about some of the longer-term themes that you've published through the Chief Investment Office. But in this thematic report, you talk about 5 in particular. How do they fit against that year ahead backdrop that you just described? And digging a little bit deeper, is there one that really sticks out for you right now?
Sure, it's a great question. So, with that backdrop that I just described in mind, we're still positioning defensively in the near term. We continue to like value sectors, and if you are willing to look through some of this short-term noise, we still do see significant longer-term opportunities driven by some of the things that you can see on the screen here. Resource scarcity being one of them, and those 2 points, security and resource scarcity, as well as value, that really helps frame the conversation around our favorite long-term themes. So if you think about some of the themes that made the list, value and security are the reasons why you see the theme like agricultural yield, even clean air, which is really about the energy transition more broadly, and circular economy as well, which is really rooted in resource scarcity. That's why you see these make the top 5, because over the last year, we've really seen pretty significant challenges related to the food supply chain, related to energy transition and affordability. And that's really highlighted some of these challenges that unfortunately we don't think are going away anytime soon. So that concept of resource scarcity, which is relevant really across the board for many of these themes, that really increases the incentive for circular solutions. So you mentioned if one sticks out, I'd recommend looking at the report for all 5, of course. But when we talk about resource scarcity, we have to talk about reuse. As things become more scarce, there's a higher incentive to reuse them.
Right. So I know that you were here with me doing a UBS Trending in early September, where we dove into the circular economy, and I know we want to go back into that. So let's talk about it. And look, the definition, as it is, just to define, it's a reusing of materials and repurposing of waste to give something a second life, circular versus linear. So give us a quick reminder, especially for the viewers, of what the circular economy is as far as it pertains to being a longer-term theme, and even if anything has changed since September. I know the one thing has changed. We just surpassed 8 billion people on this planet, so it's becoming harder and harder to find the resources that we need to feed or provide energy for that many people.
Yeah, so when we say circular economy, what we're really talking about is this idea of the closed loop economy, right? Where you can actually reuse something rather than just discarding it at that end of life stage. So it's really about going back to those 3 R's that I'm sure many of our listeners are familiar with, right? Reduce, reuse, recycle. And it's interesting to talk about right now because we're in the holiday season. I actually think it's very interesting. Estimates show that Americans generate about 25% more trash between Thanksgiving and Christmas. And if you think about it, of course, it's boxes and wrapping paper and tape and even trees. So all of these things that are seasonal. And that begs the question, what do we do with the waste? And put very simply, we need to find a solution for all of it. And some of those do exist, but what we're seeing right now is the scaling up of solutions. So you think about something like chemical recycling, that's still in the earlier stages, but we're seeing more investment here. And to put some context around what that can actually do, if you have a black shampoo bottle, just for example, that's very unlikely to be recycled with a traditional mechanical recycling method. Chemical recycling can do that no problem, because with traditional methods, it's usually the pigment, the black pigment, that doesn't get recognized properly. So again, that's one potential solution that we're seeing being scaled up. Separately, we're seeing consumers become much more open to shopping secondhand. And in fact, we've seen some pretty significant growth there in recent years. And we've seen a rise of new marketplaces that can help facilitate this. The thing I want to point out there, though, is that it's still very competitive. And you mentioned recent developments, or since we spoke last, we have seen a number of acquisitions in that space announced, and that really supports our thesis. So when we published the report a few months ago, we made a note that we did expect industry consolidation in this area in order for the industry to reach widespread profitability, because like I said, it's just very, very competitive right now.
Yeah. It's interesting when you talked about Christmas time or the holiday time. New York City, as a matter of fact, speaking of a circular economy, if anybody has a real Christmas tree, you leave it on the curb by sometime around the middle of January. The city picks it up, takes it to a place where they chip it down, mix it with other soil and leaves, and use it for composting and replanting in New York City parks and gardens. So that's a perfect example of that circular economy that we're talking about, right?
That really is. That's a great example.
Yes, anybody who lives in New York City, make sure if you have a real tree, get it out on the curb. Don't put it in a plastic bag, otherwise they won't take it. But they will recycle it. So which is great. So obviously, the purpose here is to give investors ideas on putting this into their portfolio. So how do you recommend investors invest in the circular economy today, Michelle?
Yeah, it's a really important question, because the circular economy is a broad concept. It crosses sectors, it crosses asset classes, and different industries. So those are all going to have somewhat different drivers. One thing I would point out, I mentioned earlier, we're positioned defensively within the recycling component. Large U.S. recycling companies tend to have a bit more stable earnings profile than the broader industrial sector. And then, one more point that I would make. I talked a little bit about how some of these industries are still being scaled up and they're in the infancy or earlier stages. So, that can also beg the question of what role privates and alternatives can play, because those can be, a pragmatic way to get that earlier stage exposure to some of these newer industries.
Right. By the way, something compelling in your report that you wrote under circular economy is that current consumption rates right now require the environmental resources of 2.3 Earths. When you really think about that, it's staggering. So there's never been a more important time to understand this as a concept and also as an investment vehicle. So thank you for sharing this with us, Michelle.
Absolutely.
Happy holidays to you. Good to see you.
You as well. Thank
Great.
you, Anthony.
Thank you for joining us. And for all of you out there, there's a lot more information on this topic and more, particularly within our longer-term themes universe that Michelle is a major part of, especially in writing these reports and doing all the research. You could find many of those right now on our website at ubs.com/views. Plus, we've got lots of content on social media as well, platforms like LinkedIn, Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter. Plus, all of our past UBS Trending episodes are on demand. And if you go back to September, which you can find on our website, ubs.com/studios, you'll find the original conversation Michelle and I had on the circular economy, where we go a little bit deeper as well. And as always, if you have any questions about your portfolio, make sure to speak with a financial advisor. Until next time, I'm Anthony Pastore. Have a great day, everybody, and remember to keep your eyes on what's trending. We'll see you soon.